this week's boiler tip, let's look at some of the symbols that we're likely to see on a wiring diagram. There's a lot of different shapes and types of symbols that we'll look at, so we'll look at some basic ones. The first is a simple switch. So if we show contacts and we show a switch, essentially because there's nothing connected to the switch, that's going to be a manual toggle. So for instance, the burner on-off switch could be represented like that. If we've got a switch like our first low water cutoff switch, generally those are floats. And we can illustrate that on a diagram by having a round float shape. So if you think about a float ball, when the water level comes up, it breaks or makes the switch, depending on whether it's a high alarm like I've drawn here or a low water cutoff with the float rising to make the switch. So the symbol impacts the function of the switch, but also the orientation, whether it's a normally closed or normally open switch. If we've got a pressure switch, that's often drawn as a half circle. One way I like to think of that is like an old-fashioned oil can, where you push the bottom of the oil can to squeak out a little oil. That's how that works. So this is in a normally closed position, and a rise on pressure would trip that switch. So that would shut us down when we had excess pressure on the boiler. In many cases, if it's a secondary high pressure switch, we'll put an MR underneath the switch illustration. That just indicates that it's a manual reset switch. And there are instances where we have manual reset switches in the standby circuit. So even if the boiler's in standby, it doesn't mean that there's not a switch out there that could be tripped. If we've got a temperature-based boiler, we'll often have a little zigzag line on the bottom. If I've got relay contacts, it's going to show up as an open contact. So that would be pretty typical on a probe style low water cutoff, where we might have an electronic based switching system. Or it could also represent any type of relay contact in the circuit, whether it's a building management system that opens and closes, or it's a contact on a latching relay alarm or something like that. So we'll look for switches like that. An additional type switch that we'll sometimes see is a sail switch. And usually what that indicates, like a little flag, that the wind is blowing. So we'll frequently see these on combustion air proving switches, whether it's a sail or pressure type. Sometimes a combustion air proving switch will have the half dome shape because it is actually pressure based, or it could have a sail if it's actually got a mechanical sail in there. Floats, by and large, are used exclusively for level alarms. Pressure switches could be that combustion air. It could be high steam pressure, high steam pressure. It also could be low oil pressure if we've got a low or high oil pressure switch on a boiler. So we'll see recurring instances of that. We could have a temperature switch as the operating limit on a hot water boiler, or we could have it as a low fire hold on a steam boiler. So there's a lot of applications for the different switches, but that's a quick summary for you.